welcome back to Bedtime Myths and Mysteries. Tonight, we follow Matthew Hopkins, the self-proclaimed witchfinder general, and the years when fear became a profession. In the winter-dark villages of Civil War England, fear had become part of the weather. The country was broken. King fought Parliament. Families divided. Soldiers moved through the roads. News traveled badly, rumors traveled well, and God seemed to be watching every field, every sickness, every failed birth, every strange old woman at the edge of town. It was the perfect season for a witchfinder. His name was Matthew Hopkins. He was not a judge. He was not a priest. He was not officially appointed by Parliament as the grand officer he claimed to be. But he understood something more dangerous than law. He understood panic. Hopkins came from Manningtree in Essex, a small town near the River Stour. Little is certain about his early life, which somehow makes him more unsettling. He steps into history almost fully formed, not as a boy becoming a man, but as a man who has discovered what people are willing to believe when they are frightened enough. By 1644, England was already bleeding from the Civil War. In East Anglia, strongly Puritan and largely parliamentarian, suspicion of sin and the devil ran deep. Witchcraft was not treated as a fairy tale. To many people, it was a real conspiracy against God, a secret war being fought in kitchens, barns, bedrooms, and village lanes. Hopkins claimed his work began when he overheard women in Manningtree discussing their meetings with the devil. Whether that happened exactly as he said is almost beside the point. What matters is that people believed him, or found it useful to believe him. Soon, the first accused women were named. One of them was Elizabeth Clark, an elderly, one-legged woman from Manningtree. She was poor, vulnerable, and exactly the kind of person early modern society found easy to fear. Hopkins and his associates watched her for days, depriving her of sleep, waiting for her so-called familiar spirits to appear. Sleep deprivation could break almost anyone. Exhaustion bends the mind, shadows move, words tangle. Terror begins speaking in the voice of truth. Clark confessed. And once one confession existed, others followed. This was the terrible genius of the witch hunt. It did not need proof in the modern sense. It needed a pattern. A name led to another name. A neighbor's grudge became evidence. An old illness became a curse. A mole, scar, or birthmark became the devil's mark. A cat at the door became a familiar. A woman's silence became guilt, and her fear became confirmation. Hopkins worked with John Stern, and together they moved across East Anglia, through Essex, Suffolk, Norfolk, Cambridgeshire, and beyond. They arrived in towns like specialists summoned to cure an infection. But the cure was often worse than the disease. Their methods were brutal. Even when they avoided the name of torture, the accused might be kept awake for long periods. They might be watched constantly until exhaustion loosened their speech. Their bodies could be searched for marks believed to be signs of a pact with the devil. Women known as searchers examined them intimately, looking for anything unusual, anything that could be declared unnatural. Then there was swimming. The logic was as cruel as it was absurd. Because baptism used water, and because a witch was believed to have renounced baptism, water would reject the guilty. The accused could be bound and lowered into water. If they sank, they might be innocent, though possibly dead. If they floated, they were a witch. It was not justice. It was theatre wearing a judge's wig, and people paid for it. Hopkins and his company charged towns for their services. They needed horses, assistants, travel, food, lodging. Witch-finding became a trade, and the currency was fear. A community could spend money, to prove it had enemies hidden among its own poor, widowed, disliked, strange or inconvenient. That is one of the ugliest truths of the Hopkins story. He did not create the fear from nothing. He harvested what was already growing. Villagers had suspicions before he arrived. Neighbors already remembered arguments from years before. Old women had already been blamed for dead livestock and sick children. Hopkins gave these suspicions a process. He made panic look official. In 1645, the Chelmsford trials became one of the great moments of his killing season. Dozens were accused. Many were condemned. Some died in prison before the rope could take them. Others were hanged. And still the machine moved. At Bury St. Edmunds, more people were tried. The machinery of accusation had become so large that even some authorities began to grow uneasy. Reports reached Parliament. Questions were asked. Was this justice, or had overzealous men found ways to force confessions? Were the methods lawful? Were these witch-finders protecting England, or feeding from its wounds? One critic, John Gall, the vicar of Great Staughton, publicly challenged the excesses of witch hunting. He warned against turning suspicion into certainty too easily. His opposition mattered because it showed that not everyone in the 17th century was blindly swept away. Even then, some people could see the danger, but for many of the accused, doubt came too late. Matthew Hopkins defended himself in print. In 1647, he published The Discovery of Witches, answering criticisms and explaining his methods. The pamphlet tried to make witch-finding sound disciplined, reasonable, even necessary. But beneath the language of godliness and procedure lies the same cold engine. Isolate the frightened. Exhaust them, examine them, pressure them, and call the result truth. Then, almost as suddenly as he had appeared, Hopkins was gone. He died in 1647, still a young man. Later legends claimed he was accused of witchcraft himself, subjected to his own swimming test, and executed. It is a satisfying story, but probably not true. History rarely gives such neat endings. The real ending is quieter and worse. Hopkins died, but the damage remained. His name became a symbol of professionalized paranoia. He had shown how quickly a society at war with itself could turn suspicion into a business, and business into death. His methods echoed beyond England, influencing witch-hunting ideas across the Atlantic, where later panics would find their own victims. The true horror of Matthew Hopkins is not that he was a monster unlike other men. It is that he was useful. He arrived when people wanted certainty. He offered them enemies. He gave shape to their dread. He turned grief, illness, poverty, and neighborly resentment into a map of hidden evil. And once a town accepted that witches were everywhere, every ordinary thing became evidence. A glance, a limp, a muttered word. A birthmark, a cat, a woman living alone. In the end, Matthew Hopkins did not need to summon the devil. England had already made room for him. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Bedtime Myths and Mysteries, because sometimes the darkest figures in history are not the ones who believed in evil, but the ones who learned how to profit from it.